Sandra Bullock is not only a star, she is a living testament to what it means to rise, to fall, and to rise again. Audiences remember the fierce courage of Annie Porter fighting for every breath on that speeding bus. They remember the steady love of Lee and Tuohei, opening her arms to shelter a boy in need. More than an actress, she is a devoted mother, a producer who shaped her own destiny, and a woman whose strength carried her through betrayals, nights of fear, and losses that could break anyone. Her smile once lit up red carpets across the world. Her presence filled the screen with warmth and grace. Her name became a symbol of authenticity and resilience. Sandra Bullock is not just an artist. She is a symbol of survival, of dignity that never bends, of a flame forged in storms. For more than 3 decades, she has stood between triumph and tragedy, turning private pain into unforgettable art. Now we step into that blazing symphony of life to face the most devastating storm raging at age 61. Before we begin, don't forget to hit like as a gesture of tribute to this extraordinary talent. It is heartbreaking to realize that the first cracks in her life came not from poverty or danger, but from the raw sadness of a child who never felt she belonged. A loneliness that shadowed her even as the world kept moving beneath her feet. On July 26, 1964 in Arlington, Virginia, Sandra Annette Bullock entered the world, the daughter of Helga Mayer, a German opera singer whose voice could fill grand European halls, and John Bullock, an American vocal coach and soldier who served his country with discipline and pride. From the beginning, her days were marked not by carefree play, but by the weight of expectation. Backstage in Europe, surrounded by costumes and music, learning to obey strict rehearsal schedules while other children ran free outside. By age 5, she was already under the stage lights, her fragile voice forced to blend into children's choirs, performing Mozart and Bizet. And by age 10, she had lived in more cities across Germany and Austria than most classmates in America would ever see. Each move tearing her away from friends and leaving her with the painful truth that she had no roots, no place to simply be a child. In 1976, when the family returned to the United States, the hidden ache became sharper. Her classmates mocked her funny clothes from Germany. Her accent clung to every word, drawing ridicule. The hallways echoed with laughter, not with her, but at her. What should have been the joy of belonging turned into years of quiet humiliation, years that carved deep scars of isolation. She would later reflect that standing alone on the edge of the room taught her to see the other forgotten faces, to feel the pain no one else noticed, and that empathy became the secret compass of her life and her art. German remained the language of comfort, English the language of survival. 2 identities tearing at her from within. Never fully one, never fully the other. Her life felt like a split screen. Germany on one side, America on the other. And in the middle, a young girl silenced by sadness, trapped in shadows of both. Yet those wounds did not destroy her. They hardened into strength. Loneliness pressed itself into empathy. Instability reshaped into adaptability. Rejection became authenticity, the very quality Hollywood could never manufacture, but always recognized when it burned on screen. The little girl who once hushed her own voice just to hide her difference would one day command the world with it. And the outsider mocked for not belonging would grow into a woman who made millions feel seen, building a bridge from the margins to the center with nothing more than courage, craft, and grace. Sandra Bullock did not grow up in poverty. Her childhood was shaped by music, discipline, and the structured world of 2 parents who provided stability. But in 1986, when she walked away from East Carolina University just a few credits shy of a drama degree, everything shifted. She could have stayed, graduated, and chosen safety. But Sandra wanted New York. The stage, the dream, the impossible chance. That decision carried a heartbreaking price. The city was merciless to a young woman with no famous name, no powerful connections, no safety net. The daughter of a voice coach and an opera singer became invisible overnight. Anonymous, broke, and fighting to breathe in an unforgiving world. She worked nights as a bartender, waitress, and coat checker, trudging home with blistered feet and empty pockets, collapsing into a tiny apartment, with no heat in the dead of winter. Dinner was too often nothing more than instant noodles and bitter coffee, her body running on exhaustion and sheer stubborn will. It was not that her family could not help. It was that she refused to lean on them. She wanted to prove she could carve her own place in the cruel machinery of show business. "I learned more from the numbers than I ever did from the yeses." She would later recall a confession born of nights spent rehearsing in the dark, whispering lines to herself as the city slept. The late 1980s offered her only shadows of recognition. Films like Hangman, Religion Incorporated, and Who Shot Picango came and went without a ripple. Nobody noticed. Nobody cared. The posters faded. The reels collected dust, but Sandra carried them like scars, each one a reminder of how fragile dreams could be. Yet she refused to surrender. Every rejection became fuel. Every silence sharpened her resolve. Those failures, she admitted, gave her hunger, an ache so strong it kept her standing when others would have fallen. Then in 1993 came Demolition Man. It was not the starring role, but acting alongside Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes finally placed her in the frame. A spark had been struck, and just 1 year later, lightning ignited. Speed 1994 was never written for her. The role of Annie Porter was meant for Halle Berry, even circled the desks of Hollywood's brightest stars. Sandra was not on the list, but she walked into the audition with nothing but a folding chair and a paper plate for a steering wheel. Raw, vulnerable, and utterly real. The chemistry with Keanu Reeves was explosive, undeniable. It was electric. The studio could not look away. When Speed detonated at the box office, $350 million worldwide on a modest budget, it remade her life overnight. The same young woman who once scrubbed tables and lived on ramen was suddenly Hollywood's new star. And in 1995, with While You Were Sleeping, she achieved the impossible again, conquering comedy with the same grace she had brought to action. From a waitress with blistered hands in New York to America's sweetheart in less than a decade, Sandra Bullock did not just survive. She turned rejection into resilience, obscurity into stardom, and the hardship she chose for herself into the very fire that forged an extraordinary career. Her journey proves that triumph is never about where you begin, but about how much you are willing to endure for what you believe in. From ramen noodles in a cold New York apartment to box office gold, Sandra Bullock did not just arrive in Hollywood. She stormed IT was a brutal truth that walls and gates cannot keep terror from slipping through the cracks. The man was caught. Joshua Corbett, a stranger who had stalked her for days, leaving notes and watching from the shadows. In his bag were clippings of her face and a letter that blurred delusion with obsession. He owned multiple firearms. He carried none that night. But the true weapon was the terror he left behind. The scars were not visible. They lived in her nervous system. Panic would strike out of nowhere. Tase came from something as simple as looking out a car window. She admitted she unraveled, her body replaying the night again and again. And what tormented her most was not her own fear, but the possibility that Louis might feel it too, that her son would inherit tremors not written in blood, but in silence. So she turned to EMDR therapy, piece by fragile piece, reclaiming her peace, not just for herself, but for the little boy who deserved to grow up unshadowed. Sandra Bullock had survived Hollywood storms. Now she was surviving storms of the mind. And in her fight was a truth more haunting than any role she ever played. That even the brightest stars are not immune to darkness, but the bravest are the ones who fight to heal. 4 years after her divorce, Sandra Bullock carried herself with quiet dignity, raising Louis, whom she had adopted in 2010, shielding him from the chaos of fame and giving him the safety she herself had once longed for. But even surrounded by the purest kind of love, there lingered an ache, an emptiness only true companionship could fill. That changed in 2015 when photographer Brian Randall walked into her home to capture Louise's FTH birthday party. Sandra, the woman the world adored as America's sweetheart, met someone who did not see the star, the Oscar winner or the box office queen. He saw her. Simply her. What began as a professional hire quickly deepened into something neither of them had expected, a bond so natural it felt as if it had been waiting all along. And as that bond grew, Sandra soon expanded her heart again, this time with Brian by her side. When later in 2015 she adopted Isla, a brave little girl from foster care who had already endured more hardship than any child should. Brian, once a model-turned-photographer, brought with him the wisdom of fatherhood. He had a daughter of his own, and with that came patience, gentleness, and an instinctive understanding of love's responsibilities. Soon, he became more than Sandra's partner. He became a father figure to Lewis and Isla, the steady presence who matched her devotion with his own warmth. To the children, he was not just Mom's companion, but the fun parent, the one who made ordinary moments sparkle with humor and tenderness. Though Sandra and Brian never married, their commitment was no less profound. Friends who saw them together spoke of a peace in her they had never witnessed before, a serenity that softened even her sharpest edges. After years of betrayal, loneliness, and nights spent wondering if love had abandoned her for good, Sandra had found her harbor. Their home was alive with the kind of happiness that can never be staged. School runs with laughter spilling through the car windows. Late-night talks in the kitchen long after the children had gone to bed. Birthday candles glowing in the soft warmth of family. To a woman who had spent decades under the harshest lights of Hollywood, it was this ordinariness that felt extraordinary. It was a dream she had once feared might never come true. The dream of a complete, loving, and unshakably real family. It is almost unbearable to imagine how cruel life can strike just when a woman dares to believe she has finally found her safe haven. In 2020, Sandra Bullock, after years of loneliness, betrayal, and rebuilding, was dealt a blow that no camera could ever soften. Brian Randall, the man who had turned her house into a home, the man her children called their anchor, was diagnosed with ALS, a disease so merciless it stole his strength piece by piece, leaving his spirit burning while his body betrayed him. Together, they made a pact of silence. "We didn't want the kids' joy poisoned by a countdown," Sandra would later confide to a close circle. It was not secrecy born of shame, but of love. Lewis and Isla deserved birthdays with balloons, not hushed conversations about decline. And so Sandra quietly stepped back from the world. No more premieres, no more red carpets. Her stage became a kitchen where she cooked his favorite meals, a bedside where she whispered comfort in the small hours, a home transformed into a sanctuary of care where nurses blended into the rhythm of family life. The world saw almost nothing of her then. Just flickers, paparazzi whispers, fleeting sightings. But behind closed doors, Sandra was living the hardest role of her life. Not as an actress adored by millions, but as a caregiver who refused to let the man she loved face his illness alone. She learned the rhythm of machines, how to soothe him through the long nights when sleep would not come, how to spoon-feed him with a patience born of devotion. She kept the house filled with warmth, playing music he loved, keeping laughter alive so that Louis and Isla would remember their father not for the disease but for the love that wrapped around him until the end. She clung to fragments, the curve of his smile when Louis told a joke, the way his eyes softened when Layla slipped a handmade drawing into his hand, the whispered thank yous that cost him all his strength yet meant everything. Every little moment felt like gold dust. She would later recall, and in those words lived the truth, that she had carried him through the darkest hours, not with despair, but with a love fierce enough to make even the most ordinary gesture feel eternal. And then on August 5, 2023, the unthinkable struck with a cruelty no heart could prepare for. Brian Randall, only 57, still so young, still so needed, slipped away after 3 years of being slowly stripped by ALS, a disease that robbed him of movement, then speech, until only his eyes remained to say what his body could no longer. Sandra was there holding his hand, her children pressed close as silence fell like a crushing weight that no one could lift. No cameras, no scripts, no applause. Only the ragged sound of grief inside four walls. The man who had filled their home with laughter was gone, and in his place was an emptiness so vast it seemed to swallow the air itself. For Sandra, it was devastation beyond words. She had finally found the love she thought life had denied her. A man who saw her not as a star, but as simply Sandra, a woman worth cherishing. And she was forced to watch him vanish like smoke between her fingers. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, Every whispered promise at his bedside had been an act of defiance against time. And still time won. For Louis Wiss and Layla, who had once slipped drawings into his hands and climbed onto his lap for stories, the loss was a wound they were too young to name, but would carry forever. Their family of 4, once whole, had been broken apart by a thief no one could fight. The house that had echoed with ordinary joys, birthday candles, shared dinners, the quiet miracle of belonging, now echoed with absence. The walls themselves seemed to remember him, and in their stillness lay the cruel reminder that even the brightest flame can be snatched away by fate's cold hand. For Sandra, who had endured betrayal, humiliation, and every storm Hollywood could conjure, this grief was deeper, raw, more merciless. Headlines could never capture it. The Oscar on her shelf could not comfort it. Fame could not shield her from it. This was not just loss. It was the shattering of the only safe haven she had ever built. And yet in that unbearable silence, she still rose, carrying forward not just the memory of love, but the proof of what it means to love completely. Even when the ending is written in heartbreak. But fate was not finished testing her. Just 9 days after Brian's passing, when her heart was still raw with grief, another storm erupted. This time not within her home, but on the world stage. The Blind Side, the very film that had won Sandra her Oscar and moved millions with its message of compassion, was suddenly dragged into controversy. Michael O'Hare, the man whose story inspired the film, filed a lawsuit against the Tuhey family, claiming he had been deceived and exploited. Though Sandra had no legal connection to the case, her name was thrust into the headlines, bound forever to the film that had once symbolized her greatest triumph. What followed was as cruel as it was unfair. In the unforgiving arena of social media, voices rose not with empathy for her loss, but with demands. Demands that she return her Academy Award as if she bore responsibility for events far outside her control. Imagine the brutality. A woman mourning the man she had called her partner for 8 years, blindsided by whispers that questioned not her performance, but her integrity. The same role that had brought her to the peak of professional recognition now became a weapon used to wound her when she was already brought to her knees. It was a double blow, one deeply personal, one cruelly public. The loss of love and the loss of peace collided in a single merciless season. For anyone else, it might have broken them. But Sandra did not respond with anger or bitterness or spectacle. She chose silence. She chose dignity. She chose to shelter Louis and Ila, anchoring herself once more in motherhood when every other certainty had been stripped away. And that is where her true strength shines brightest. Not in the billion-dollar box office, not in the golden statue on a shelf, but in the way she endures. She has loved through betrayal, cared through illness, and stood through loss. And in 2023, she carried the storm of a lifetime, losing her great love and being unfairly judged by the world. Yet still, she remained unbowed, unbroken. A woman who answers cruelty not with fury but with grace. Sandra Bullock's story is not simply about fame or fortune. It is about resilience forged in fire. It is about the unshakable dignity of a woman who has been tested, scarred, and shattered and yet still chooses love over bitterness, silence over spectacle, and compassion over despair. And that is why even in the darkest of storms, she remains a beacon not just of Hollywood but of humanity itself. And so as the storms of 2023 finally receded, Sandra found herself standing in their aftermath, no longer defined by scandal or loss, but by the quiet strength of a woman who has endured it all. Today at 61, she carries not only the weight of those scars, but also the grace of survival, living a life shaped less by Hollywood's spotlight and more by the sanctuary she has built for her children. Sandra Bullock now lives largely away from the relentless glare of cameras. Her world is centered in Los Angeles, where she owns a portfolio of homes worth nearly $39 million. Each a retreat carved from decades of discipline and daring. There's the stilt house overlooking the Pacific in Malibu, its windows catching sunsets she once admitted were her favorite form of therapy. There's the Beverly Hills refuge wrapped in trees and silence where she has leaned into healing. And there are her beloved southern escapes, including Tybee Island in Georgia, where she often takes Lewis and Isla to feel the steadiness of the ocean. Together, these homes form not just a real estate empire, but a map of safe harbors against life's storms. Her net worth, estimated at $250 million, is a result of box office triumphs, historic negotiations like her deal on Gravity, and the streaming era where Bird Box became a global phenomenon. Yet, she has often said her true wealth is not measured in millions, but in ordinary mornings with my kids, making pancakes, just being present. Professionally, she has chosen to step back. After the whirlwind of The Lost City in 2022, Sandra announced she would take a break from acting to focus on motherhood and healing. True to her word, she has largely vanished from sets and red carpets. She is not retired. She still produces through Fortis Films, and Hollywood would welcome her back in an instant. But for now, her most important role is off-screen. Right now, she once said, "The one thing I want to be is present for them." By them, she meant Lewis and Layla, the children she shields with the same ferocity she once poured into her career. And yet, even in retreat, her presence lingers. Hollywood cannot forget the woman who turned rejection into resilience, who carried Gravity on her shoulders, who redefined the rom-com and the action thriller in the same breath. She may not be a fixture at every award season, but her influence endures like the afterglow of a flame too bright to fade. Still, the shadows remain. Brian Randall's death is a wound that will never fully close. Sandra once described him as the love of my life, the best thing ever. And those words now echo with heartbreaking finality. Friends say she keeps his photographs close, that his absence is felt in the quiet pauses of her days. For Lewis and Isla, he remains part of the family's story, a presence they still speak of. Sandra carries the dual weight of guiding them forward while privately mourning the love she lost too soon. It is a delicate balance, protecting her children's innocence while honoring her own heartbreak. But it is the balance she has chosen with dignity. At 61, Sandra Bullock is a portrait of survival. Her beauty remains luminous, though it now carries the lines of nights lived in both laughter and tears. She keeps her health with discipline. Pilates, kickboxing, cycling, even weekend dance sessions, and her famously simple skincare routine. Proof that resilience is not just spiritual, but physical. Public appearances are rare, but when they happen, fans are struck by her radiance. Not in spite of her pain, but because she has carried it with grace. Sandra's story today is not about constant visibility or endless projects. It is about what remains when the lights dim. A woman who has faced betrayal, break-ins, illness, loss, and the cruelty of judgment, and yet still chooses love. A mother who places her children above career, above applause, above everything. A survivor who has shown the world that strength is not loud. It is steady, quiet, and unbreakable. Her Oscar will always shine. Her films will always endure. But perhaps her greatest legacy is this, the proof that dignity can outlast devastation. Sandra Bullock reminds us that resilience is not an act but a way of living, a flame that keeps burning even when storms try to snuff it out. So, as we look back on the journey of this extraordinary woman, marked by triumphs, scars, and an unshakable grace, we are reminded of the quiet power of resilience. Sandra Bullock is not only a star we watched on screen, but a survivor who continues to walk through life with dignity and love. And before we go, don't forget to hit like as a gesture of tribute to Sandra Bullock, a star, a survivor, and above all, a mother whose strength continues to inspire the world.